And today, Los Angeles hosts the world's largest and longest running life celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King. But when the civil rights leader visited Los Angeles in the early 60s, he was seen as too controversial for many local leaders, except for one, Supervisor Kenneth Hahn. Back in 2021, Eyewitness News reporter Carlos Granda spoke with his daughter, LA County Supervisor Janice Hahn, about her family's unique connection to Dr. King.
Dr. Martin Luther King is known around the world for justice and civil rights. His words and actions changed America. But in 1961, when Dr. King visited Los Angeles, no politician wanted to meet him, except one, longtime Supervisor Kenneth Hahn.
That was a brave thing that he did. It wasn't until many, many, many years later when I realized how controversial Dr. King was.
As we visited the magnificent Martin Luther King Memorial, current Supervisor Janice Hahn remembers her father talking about that very special visit. She says Dr. King was scheduled to speak at a church, and the pastor had called a number of politicians.
The mayor was busy. The state senators had a scheduling conflict. The assembly members wanted to spend time with their family. Not a city council member felt that they wanted to do that. And he finally got to my dad, and my dad answered the phone. He said, "I would be honored to greet Dr. King."
On that day, Kenneth Hahn went to the airport, and it became history.
As you can see, he actually went up to the stairs coming down from the airplane. It was a United Airlines flight to greet him, and he took along a county photographer so that we forever will have that photo.
Kenneth Hahn then took Dr. King on a small tour of Los Angeles. Janice Hahn says they started talking, and her father told her that Dr. King's words were inspirational.
At that time, Dr. King was sharing his hopes, his dreams about what America could look like. And so my father loved to say that he heard the "I Have a Dream" speech before Dr. King even gave it.
I'm Carlos Granda, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
And Supervisor Janice Hahn joins us live this morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Good morning.
Good morning. It's great to be with you.
Absolutely. Supervisor Hahn, tell us about your father's relationship with Dr. Martin Luther King.
Well, every time we celebrate Dr. King, particularly on a day like today, I feel so honored that my family has such a special relationship with the King family. And after that day that he spent with Dr. King, he spent almost 2 hours alone with him. You know, after he drove him around his district, he took him up to his own office and gave him a cup of coffee. And my father was so moved by Dr. King's words that day, by his spirit, by his demeanor, that he actually put a little gold plaque on the back of that chair. So forever, people would know that Dr. King sat there. But after the Watts riots, when it became clear that the community of Watts needed a hospital, my father worked very hard to build the Martin Luther King Jr. Hospital. But before it was named that, he wanted to ask Mrs. King if it would be all right if he named the hospital after her husband. Of course, that was after Dr. King had been assassinated. And my father started the conversation off with Mrs. King by saying, "I know you don't know who I am, but if it's okay with you, I'd like to name this hospital in Watts after your husband." And she stopped him and she said, "Oh no, I remember, I know who you are." She said, "When my Martin came home from Los Angeles that day, he couldn't stop talking about how nice this white politician had been to him." I have since met Dr. King's children, and we all have shared the same story about that very precious day when Dr. King first came to visit Los Angeles.
Yeah, it's amazing to look back on all of this and you hearing these stories. How did that relationship between the two of them have an impact on you personally?
Well, I think my dad was so sort of ahead of his time by being willing to go and greet Dr. King when he came to the airport to give him an official welcome from the county of Los Angeles. My father represented a predominantly African-American district as an LA County supervisor. So I really believe that shaped who I was. It shaped my understanding of race relations, and it helped, make me want to also be a champion for civil rights. And then, fast forward many, many years later, I think when I had the opportunity to return Bruce's Beach in Manhattan Beach to the remaining descendants of an African-American couple, Willa and Charles Bruce, 100 years later, I believe that was sort of a full circle for the Hahn family in how we believed it was just as important every day to honor the rights, particularly of the African-American community, as it was that day that my father welcomed Dr. Martin Luther King.
Yeah, truly a full circle moment there. LA is now home to the world's largest and longest running life celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King. But back in 1961, as we've been talking about, he was seen as too controversial. How much closer do you think that we are to Dr. King's dream for America?
And, that's an interesting point, because I was just a young girl when my father came home and talked about this amazing man, Dr. Martin Luther King, and his hopes and dreams for America. But it wasn't until I was a member of Congress and knowing Dr. John Lewis and traveling to Selma, to Montgomery, to Birmingham, that I began to understand how controversial Dr. King really was, particularly for white politicians who did not want to be associated with him. And I think one of Dr. King's greatest legacies was his insistence on nonviolent protest. He studied that from Gandhi. And I believe we've lost that purity about when we protest, when we disagree with people, that we really have to get back the idea of nonviolent protest so that marches are peaceful, protests are peaceful, showing up at government meetings are peaceful. And I also think that there is still such inequity among people of color. And I think we have to work so much harder every day to achieve Dr. King's dream. I don't think we're there yet. I believe we've made huge strides, but I don't believe we're there yet. And it is important that each of us today recommit ourselves to the principles and the ideals and the dreams that Dr. King had, so that we actually become a more perfect union here, particularly in America.
I think that's well said. And Supervisor Hahn, as we celebrate with the parade and the festival and we reflect back on all the memories that we have, what does this day, this annual celebration mean to you, if you could sum it up in a few words?
Well, it was a long time coming that we even had this holiday. It took a lot of fighting and championed by a lot of people to make this a holiday. But I think this holiday is important, that it reminds each and every one of us, that one man's words, one man's dreams, one man's hopes really can stay alive. And I know many of us have turned this day into a day of service, just remembering that whatever we do today, that we can be kind to one another, we can be loving to one another, and we can put forward all the words and all the dreams that Dr. King held for this great country.
Such an impressive day. Supervisor Hahn, we appreciate you talking with us today and for sharing those memories about your father. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Irene.